Welcome to the Monsters of Fantasy. This was written, produced, recorded, and edited by me, Shawn McCarter. Monsters of Fantasy is a production in which I will explore the truly horrific side of the fantasy world known as Dungeons and Dragons. There are content warnings in the show notes below. Episode 4: The Displacer Beast.
Statement given by Bartimaeus regarding his experiences with what he calls a Displacer Beast. I guess it's about time I give you a statement, old friend. You've been hounding me for years for one of these, and I finally feel like I owe you one, Nico. I got a whole catalog of different monsters I've slain that I could probably fill your entire library myself. You may call me an adventurer, a ranger, or a fighter, whatever label you'd like to put on it, but the truth of the matter is that I'm a hunter. Every creature in this world is either a hunter or the hunted, and I've spent my entire life making sure I was on the right side of the line. I found out in my younger years that things were more powerful than I, and if I wasn't careful, they would end my life. And because I'm writing this down, I'd like to say I've been pretty good at it, making sure to be the hunter and not the hunted. You and I aren't so different, Nicholas, except you cower in your castle and hunt for safe little stories. I'm out there experiencing the thrill of this thing you call the Monster Manual, not making it. But let me tell you something I know you've probably never heard of before. Now, they're similar to those blink dogs you mentioned a few years back, but trust me, it's much, much worse. It was about 3 years ago, and had to be. I was staying over in Hellhound's district on the southern side of the Y. Specifically, I was staying at the Salted Tip at the time. Not going to go much into detail, but a man has his needs. I was taking a drag outside when a couple of blokes, looked like merchants from out of town, stumbled by and seemed to have a bit too much to drink. They were talking about their last night on land and how they were about to set sail for Jubani in the morning. Now you must imagine my surprise when I heard this. I've been trying to find my way out to that jungle for years. Just as well as I do how famous it is for its mystery and wonder. Just a few weeks before that night, I heard rumors of a giant reptile larger than the houses we lived in, teeth longer than my entire body, and a tail that could kill you with a single blow. But this isn't a story about that beast, no. Sure, the T-Rex was strong. Sure, it was the top of its food chain. But this thing, it wasn't a true hunter like this thing was. I followed the two idiots down to the docks where I watched them start climbing aboard this massive merchant ship. I'm no ship expert, but it clearly had seen its better days. It was an old beat-up cargo ship that had stains all over the wood, discolored planks scattering the hull from numerous repairs, and the sails looked old and soiled. Across the front, underneath the bust of a mermaid, it read, Lady Umbra. However, if this crew thought they could get to Jubani with this ship, then I planned on hopping aboard and joining them. Now, thanks to the almost entire crew being completely drunk, it was pretty easy to sneak on that first night. I went down below deck and came to their storage room. All the crates were completely empty, but I didn't really think anything of it because the crew sounded like merchants, and I figured they were emptied out to bring back supplies. There were about 3 crates that they had stacked up near the stairs that contained food, but other than that, the other 30 or so were empty. This wasn't the first time I've stowed away, nor would it be the last, so I knew how to keep myself hidden amongst the crates if anyone were to come down there snooping. But that didn't end up happening, nor did any of the crew seem to notice the extra food that went missing. It took 2 weeks, and it was far from uncomfortable, but I passed the time sharpening, organizing, and perfecting all of my hunting tools during the day. When we finally did make land, I was so eager to explore this untapped world, but refrained from doing so right away. I had been listening from below deck, and I knew that they had been only planned to stay there for about 24 hours. The island still wasn't safe, and anyone who did dare set foot on it to try and profit off the land typically only got about a 30-minute walk from the coastline. Anything deeper than that, and well, the jungle doesn't seem to let most people return. Despite all those rumors, I had already decided that as soon as it got quiet and the coast was clear, I'd sneak off into the woods and spring out until I found something to hunt. But that time never came. About an hour went by and the crew had been talking non-stop at this point, excited by their different fruits that they were going to sell. From the sounds of it, one of them even caught some kind of animal and had planned on selling it. This had particularly pleased the merchants and sailors, and they started to party deep into the night. I of course was frustrated that I had to sit underneath all their merriment, but I had already waited 2 weeks to start this hunt, and I could wait a bit more. Another half-hour passed of this excitement, and it sounded as if the incoherent hooting and hollering had turned into shouts and screams. I would have thought my hearing was a bit off, because it sounded like a low thunder was rolling on top of the deck. The stomping to music turned into hurried sprinting. At this point I had climbed on top of a few crates and put my ear to the ceiling. I heard the familiar crying that every prey makes as it knows it's about to die. And then, as loud as the crying was above me, it was soon replaced by the wet sound of flesh ripping away from bone. I tried taking a peek through the cracks to get a better look. At first I just saw the speckled night sky and the ship's railing in the distance. Draped over it was some poor sailor who was missing his lower half. I heard the sounds of heavy, padded feet walking across wood, followed by dragging, and I tried to turn to get a better look at it. I saw the body being dragged away first. It was one of the two that had led me to the ship. His neck was clearly broken and was resting in the jaws of some giant black beast. I couldn't make out exactly what it was in the moment. I think I figured it was a panther of some sorts, but I'll never forget its eyes. Its body had long blended into the darkness of the night, but his green eyes glowed with the ominous glint of a predator. No, a hunter. I stilled my heart from racing. I knew that if I wanted a good chance at hunting this beast down, that I should wait. At the time I wasn't thinking about how I'd get back to the mainland, nor that from the sounds of it, this thing hunted in packs. There had to be at least 4 of them. These things were dragging their kills to their dens, and then, if I'm lucky, I'll be able to strike while they're sleeping. I damn well made sure to wait almost in half an hour before I felt comfortable coming up to the upper deck. You know, I never got an exact count of how many merchants and sailors were on the ship, but I'd figure at about 15 or 20. Up on the deck of Lady Umbra there were only probably 9 or 10 left, if you count them all together. Now, the side I'm about to tell you is what caused me to choose this monster for my statement. I know you aren't squeamish, Nicholas, but I still wish to warn you. I walked out into the front of the ship, and the first thing I noticed were the large claw marks that covered the mast. Attached to them were the tattered remains of the sails blowing slightly. Those same deep gouges caused by the beast were sprawled all over the ship. I could see how the beast used the terrain to its fullest to trap and corner its prey. There were 3 bodies I could see that looked to be left mostly intact. However, everywhere my eyes landed, there was some splatter of blood. I started to lose track of what severed arm went to what torso. Entrails were strewn about the deck, almost as if a cat were playing with yarn. All the crates that contained anything of value had been completely smashed in the chaos. However, if you were to happen upon the scene, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference from the exotic fruits and the poor sailors whose remains covered the merchandise. These men didn't come unprepared either. I could see swords, shields, and scimitars littering the ground, but none of them were soiled with the blood of the beast. No, I could tell the only blood that was on this ship was that of the prey. I kinda felt bad looking around the ship. Those poor bastards didn't stand a chance and were destined to be hunted. After walking through a few puddles of blood, I walked up to one of the sailors who had been closest to me. He was lying face down in a pool of his own blood that had already started dripping down onto the cargo area. His clothes, having been already dirty and old, were just a muddy black now that were drenched in his own blood. From the back he actually looked unharmed, and I couldn't see any claw or teeth marks. Wanting to be sure of what I was working with, I turned him over to get a better look. I don't know what I expected, honestly, when I turned him over, but it sure as hell wasn't dozens of tiny, bloodied holes along his abdomen. After examining the holes for a bit, I noticed that they had 2 sets of them clustered in groups of about 30 or so, each of them forming the rough shape of a leaf. I thought it was teeth, but you see the problem with that logic is that it didn't quite match the same markings that ripped out its throat. So then my next thought was that it was claws. That didn't make sense either. I studied the claw marks that it had made along the mast, and they definitely didn't match up to the claw marks I was seeing. I was so confused I started turning over body after mutilated body to try and understand exactly what it was. I didn't spend long because I knew I had to get a move on, but on all the corpses that were intact enough I found those exact same markings. I also deduced that whatever this was, it was used as the primary form of attack. My heart started racing with excitement. These creatures that had massive claws and powerful jaws that could kill most prey had something else, something even more deadly, and I had no idea what it was. I started sprinting into the woods, following the trail of blood that the beast left, leading me deeper into the jungle. The trick when following your prey is to move quickly and quietly. You can't run at full sprint or whatever it is you're following will know, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't like my chances at a foot race with this thing. So I prowled through the undergrowth following the drips of blood that came from the meal they were dragging back. This went on for a while, and honestly I started losing track of time. Things like this took time, and I wasn't in a hurry, and it was better to be safe about my surroundings. The trees were unbelievably tall. Now I know I'm a bit shorter than most folk, but I promise you, these trees were towering, taller than any tree I've ever seen outside the Raven's Forest. But these trees didn't grow and get this large due to a long and fruitful life, no. The ground was littered with the corpses of fallen branches and leaves. The forest was so hot and humid and untouched by man that it grew rapidly and wildly. Branches would snap and break, making room for more stronger limbs that would then break through and try to reach to the top of the canopy. Because of this, there was a severe lack of light that ever made it to the ground. This was perfect for all the lianas that could scale up to the top, becoming so thick that you could swing from them. The fungal life was teeming and vibrant. All the different species of mosses and other herbaceous plants fascinated me. But I was currently hunting, and while the lack of light and floor made of dead branches and leaves was wonderful for our mushroom friends, it was horrible for a halfling trying to stealth their way through an unknown jungle in the middle of the darkest night I was ever experiencing. So as much as I wanted to explore, I kept focus, made sure to follow all paths that seemed to be carved by the other monsters that lurked that jungle. Most animals will tend to follow the path of least resistance, and then over time those paths are kind of set in stone until some new greedy plant decides to take that spot over once again. Because I was on the ground, I figured I was following the path of some prey, maybe a large herbivore. You see, prey have to keep running. They have no direction, no consistency, they just need to run as fast as possible. Follow the path of least resistance, and you may live. I never found the answer to whatever creature made the path I was following. I saw numerous friends of the night, large snakes hanging from the canopy, large-eyed primates that I've never seen before that would dart away at the sight of me. And above me I would hear the disturbance of the air, look up and see not a bird but a moth the size of a sheep. And behind the beating of wings I heard the echoes of thousands and thousands of tiny little insects. At one point during the night I heard the sounds of a creature crying out in pain, and thinking it might be caused by one of those panthers I was tracking, I decided to follow it. But I came upon the sight of some poor reptile that found itself in the jaws of a plant. I couldn't make out anything in the dark, but I heard the familiar sound of acid-dissolving flesh and decided to go back to tracking the blood. This process went on for another 20 minutes until I had a very alarming realization. You see, it was at that moment that I noticed something new. Well, not new, but the same. I had passed the spot before. It was a very dark night, but I was sure that the fauna I was looking at, the roots I was climbing over, and the blood spatter that I passed my hand over were all the same ones I had encountered near the beginning of this journey. I didn't panic though. This meant one of two things. I fucked up massively and have led myself in a circle and was now lost beyond belief. Or that the creature I was following had led me here. I know a normal person would think they had made a mistake, that it was dark and that it's a new environment and it was totally possible to get lost in this pitch-black tangle of vines and knotted roots. But normal people aren't me. Deep down inside I knew that this thing had to be fucking with me. I sat there for a moment and stilled out all the methodical sounds of the insects buzzing. I reached in my haversack and I pulled out a small bit of fleece coated in blood. I held it up and took a deep inhalation, filling my nostrils not with the scent of blood, but that of the beast that I was intently focusing on. Aided by the druidic forces that kept this jungle alive, I was able to sense the creature about 100 or so yards behind me. It, too, stopped. Now this didn't alarm me. The creature was toying with me, and if I let it continue to think that, whenever it attacked, I would be prepared. I would have the upper hand. I knew it was faster than me and probably stronger than me, but I had an entire arsenal tucked away and was far more lethal than it would ever think. So I pretended to be the prey for a little bit longer. I knew if I pretended to be winded and tired that it would probably get bored of the chase and finally go for the kill, at which point I would counter him. I decided, though, that I still want to keep him at range, as that was my best bet at coming out on top of this encounter. I pulled a fine elven bow that I had custom made for me by a friend up north in the Ravens Forest. It was actually under her guidance. I had learned all of this tracking and hunting stuff, but I mention this only because of the bow. I had been a lot better than some standard crap that you can buy at a shop. No, what I had was a one-of-a-kind weapon. It wasn't long before I heard the sounds of the creature coming closer. Don't get me wrong, it was silent, but the spell I'd used allowed me to keep a general sense of the direction and speed it was traveling, and when I felt the presence drop dozens of feet below from the canopy and start to rapidly close the distance, I knew it was time to strike. I turned around and whispered the elvish incantation into the feathers of the arrow I had notched. My eyes locked immediately on the beast, despite the darkness, because at this point it was only 30 or so feet away, and I could see its glowing eyes clearly about to leap. I let loose the arrow towards the thing, and the last of the elvish incantation rolled off my lips. As I did so, the arrow that was now arcing through the air instantly became a pure, white-hot bolt of lightning hurling towards the cat-like beast. Because of the illumination, I could finally get a good look at this thing that had been hunting me. Crouched down, running on all six, was a jet-black feline creature that had to be at least 10 feet long from head to tail. And you did hear that right, it had an extra set of front legs protruding out of its ribcage, at the end of which it had massive stretched claws that it was using to propel itself towards me. Its jaws agape, I saw the teeth that it intended to clamp around my neck. But I found my eyes staring in shock at the 2 10-foot-long tentacles that grew from the shoulder blades of this beast. They were flicking about above the beast, and at the end of them were these large spade-shaped pads that contained rows and rows of spiked bone, from the tips of which were stained with blood. The monstrosity pounced into the air to attack me, but it was too late. My arrow was already on its path. Or so my eyes believed. For 1 second I was watching my bolt flying directly towards the creature, and the second it connected I watched the entire form of the beast flicker as the arrow went straight through the creature, and that very second I felt the switch of the line. I was no longer the hunter. I was now the prey. It was still barreling towards me, and my instincts took over, and my legs threw me out of the way, hurling me into a bundle of dead, damp leaves. Or so I thought, but the searing hot pain from my back told me otherwise. I reached back and clutched my shoulder, and I felt a dozen of tiny holes covering my back. I started to panic because I knew for a fact I threw myself out of the way of the creature, and yet somehow it still hit me. At the time I thought it was because maybe I severely misjudged the reach of the tentacles that protruded from the beast, the second of which I saw swinging through the air towards me, but it was so far off the mark I didn't pay any attention. I was already tracing it back to the main body when all of a sudden my entire left rib cage exploded in pain as the beast opened up more wounds. Luckily they weren't too deep, or I believe those first 2 surprise hits would have killed me. At first I thought a second creature was helping this one, hunting in a pack, one of them attacking from the shadows. But I would have sensed it earlier, and I know for a fact that I was not that bad of a hunter, that I would have missed being tailed by 2 of these beasts. No, something else had to be happening, but my panicked prey mind only saw 2 options: fight or flight. I chose to fight and decided to even the playing field. Whispering to the powers of the sun in the ancient elven tongue, I brought forth a fragment of his power, and I lit up the small portion of the jungle that we were in. The monster seemed to almost cower in fear for a split second, as I'm sure it was blinded from the light. In the few seconds it took to orient itself, though, I had figured the beast out. Well, not completely, but I saw very clearly that the beast was flickering. I don't know how it did it, and despite the 30 minutes you spent raving about Henry, your new blink dog, I didn't put the 2 together. I just knew that the beast's true position was hidden amongst the solid forms that would appear and reappear. However, unlike the blink dog, it seemed to be focused on a more central point to the main body, and served more as a distraction rather than a mode of transportation. I could see that my lightning bolt had damaged it, but maybe not to the degree that I'd nearly hoped. I saw lightning burns across its rib cage and up its center leg. It regained its composure and leapt at me again, striking with both tentacles. However, now in the bright daylight the creature was a lot easier to read, and while it did not know, the relationship of cat and mouse had shifted. I was able to easily dodge by jumping up as they both slammed into the ground below, completely splintering the knot of roots I had been standing on. The creature let out such a powerful and targeted snarl. This thing really wanted to kill me. I could tell the game was over to this thing, and that if it could, it would see that the next breath I took were my last. So I gave him the same respect he gave me. I had already drawn out my dagger, and within seconds I buried the hilt into the base of its skull. I don't care what world it came from or how large it was. Actually, the size made it so I was more likely I was right. I was aiming for the soft spot most mammals have where the skull and spine meet, except this time I had aimed about 2 feet to the right of where I believed the creature actually was. I felt my knife sink into flesh and between real bone. The snarling growl of this ferocious beast then turned into a high-pitched pain yelp as it kicked wildly. But it was already done. Unlike this creature, I was a hunter, and a hunter knows when to stop playing games and kill their target in one strike.
You know, Nico, when we started doing our own research to find what we should put in the next entry, we found this tucked away. Is this the same Barty that was featured in the statement you took about the pixies? It couldn't be, right? Because an all-powerful, all-knowing wizard would put something that important down in their notes if it were true, right? And plus this fellow seemed a lot more threatening than the one Freya spoke of. But you seem to have taken hundreds of notes about this creature, the Durlagon or Displacer Beast or whatever you call it, and not a single one about this Bartimaeus fellow. Okay, now I am rambling again. I'm sorry, Nico, I appreciate the job you've given me. It's actually kind of fun. Anyway. Displacer Beast. Physiology. Displacer Beasts are 6-legged monstrosities that resemble the Black Panther of our homeworld. However, in addition to 2 extra limbs, they also have 2 tentacles that extend from behind the shoulder blade of the Displacer Beast. At the ends of the tentacles, the fur changes into a fleshy, gummy-like spade-shaped pad. Covering the entire padded area are sharp, tooth-like protrusions. Thanks to the primary dissection notes left to us, we were able to add that, similar to sharks, the Displacer Beast will continue to grow and replace these teeth throughout its lifetime. Now, something else we determined during the dissection process was that the Displacer Beast doesn't have any natural weaknesses or resistances. It's just a very fast and strong predator. But if you were to attack it before it attacks you, then it won't take too long to take it down. The problem, however, becomes known very quickly when observing the Displacer Beast why you can't just hit it. Abilities. Through many extensive research, we found out that the Displacer Beast has a way to manipulate the light around itself. the creature will bend the light reflecting off of its own coat to appear 3 to 5 feet away from where the creature is actually standing. This, paired with its speed and strength of the Displacer Beast, make it a very deadly creature. We aren't sure if this is something the Displacer Beast chooses to do, or if it's an ongoing effect. While the Displacer Beast is intelligent enough to take commands, I don't think it's intelligent enough to completely understand its own ability. I believe this is just a persistent effect, and it aids in leading that this monstrosity climbs to the top of its food chain. Attacks. The Displacer Beast is a large feline predator. It has large claws and sharp teeth designed for ripping apart its prey. But through our studies, it seems the Displacer Beast almost never attacks with its claws or teeth. Instead, it prefers to use its long barbed tentacles to strike and kill its prey from a distance. Well, that brings us an end to another entry, Nico. Why is your castle such a mess? Luna got lost in the artifacts floors, for 3 days. I don't know how it's even possible that you collected all of these stories and items that you have, but I guess it helps when you have strong friends like Bartimaeus here. Don't think I didn't recognize that his arcane abilities were more than a few cantrips like our previous statements. It's funny, but the elf he was mentioning just seems to keep tickling the back of my head. I can't seem to put a finger on it, though. Oh well. Bye, Nico.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Monsters of Fantasy. If you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to share it with your friends and family. Check the links in the description below to find us on social media where we post about upcoming episodes. This episode was inspired by the countless stories I heard over the years regarding the Displacer Beast. It has been a formidable monster since the first edition of Dungeons & Dragons, putting the fear of being prey in the minds of all players. Join me next week as Kez'Var and company begin uncovering the mystery of Nico's castle. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.